Video 83, Part 2, in answering a question by a viewer of my video number 83. Here once again explained, coming forth, the ancient spirit tralaka. The question was, do you see how the corporations can be and are used to corrupt everything and allow people to even starve? We just can't go about and saying we're not going to do this and we're not going to just exclude it, can we? My response to that, after much thought, I grew up in business, and I even spent quite a few years as a limo driver who had many reoccurring clients. This is in this lifetime, in Fortune 500 companies, large colleges, and so forth. Businesses will not have their clout should the governors of the 50 states get together and make some decisions and take back much of the power which belongs to them and not the corruption incorporated in Washington, so to speak. It's not the actual name, it's a phrasing. Because these companies need that deceptiveness of those filthy interworkings of Washington to aid in those many Ponzi schemes, these corrupt companies that they have that fills their pockets with wheelbarrows of cash and gold while draining the taxpayers, while making it look plausibly like it's okay for a large corrupt business to try to do all of that within one single state only. The citizens will be able to see this with the changes that are happening here in 2013, and they'll be screaming at their politicians and their governor until something gets cleaned up about it. Now, I remember many times the private jet the person was being driven to get on at the private airport would be coming in a bit late. The big business guy or woman that are of top management in, let's say, banking firms or like auto companies, Fortune 500 companies, anyhow, they would square off with me in an open conversation. I would layer in my question very carefully. Now, this is the early days of this conjunction with the ancient spirit tralaka, and the questions will get layered very carefully with a hidden inner question while I'm answering a question, which I had great fun doing and discovering that I enjoyed it to get the truths out of people while keeping a straight face without emotions. Years later, as I was putting it all together now, here in the cave, it still comes down to agreeing with the ancient spirit tralaka that once the federal government is being stripped of most of its grossly overused powers, there will be a few seasons of softness where the big businesses will be scrambling to readjust to state level propaganda to try to control the miniature government, the state level governments, as the big businesses had done in Washington, D.C. for generations. We have a window here of a few years to put the pressure on those 50 state governors to get them to reassess and understand it is needed to strip the federal government of much other power to be able to keep America going forward. During this time, bylaws need to be put in place to keep those wayward, dirty, filthy, crummy, corrupt companies from being leeches to which and upon to the state level of governments. This is also needed. It is needed to tighten that part of the leadership that will propel this country forward into decades of new growth. Once things get readjusted, the governors will come to realize that they can make their state more money for the people who live within the state lines if the corrupt companies are kept on a short chain. For this country to build for their future, all companies need to be equal. To the rules for contract bids need to be equal. The ratio of state employees raises need to be kept within the percentages of the actual growth of the state, with the income, with the way the economy is doing. This keeps, this will help keep smaller companies healthy enough to keep bidding on contracts against some of the supersized unions and the state unions who are also bidding. There has to be equal amount of bidding and equal amount of opportunity. This will create much growth without the federal government getting their dirty fingers involved with it. It was a most curious thing to be a limousine driver. For most businesses, people back in the limousine do not realize, or did not realize, that I could hear them plain and clearly, even with that driving window closed. When we would both get outside of the onto the airport tarmac, back then when we still could drive on a tarmac, waiting for the plane to taxi over, I enjoyed asking just the right questions. From the whisperings of the ancient spirit tralaka, they would not be too quick to answer. They learned as they had me for other events to be very careful on how to answer questions to me. I would measure, though, the time from asking to the time of response versus the different looks and perceptions of the changes of their face to gauge on just how close or how far off the target info I was hitting on. This got me into many very private conversations that I actually went to spend. When I stopped limo driving, I went to hypnotists to get this blocked. So those conversations, for the most part, unless I really push hard, I'm not going to spill the beans on. But yet, some of those conversations ended up being threats to my livelihood because I was hitting way too close to the center of the target, this being the absolute informations. And which doesn't faze me, and still doesn't, even here in my wheelchair. Should we be able to get the 50 state governors to pull back full authority, that is their constitutional rights, that the state governors used to have? This will cause all sorts of readjusting of companies, and this is needed, and it's important to be able to pay attention as these things start to occur. This is by the bylaws also having much stiffer legal rules that the governors and their cabinets will have to abide by as these things come into place, to be able to keep the corrupt slime, filthy, crummy, corrupt companies, not all of them, but the ones that are, up to a lesser role. This will also require all 50 state governors to be able to swear allegiance to follow the original Constitution in upholding the laws for large companies and small alike. Corporate versus family. Huge business versus incubator business. True, some of this will be timing, as with the coming closer of the Nibiru red dead star, which many people wrongly call Planet X, because this is going to be causing lots of changes in the air. I will try as hard as I can in my private towns that I like to live in. I love living in small towns, but I try to shop in those small towns I live in instead of going to the big supermarkets and the big super malls. So I try to keep the money in the town, even if I have to pay, let's say, an extra 10%. I try to arrange my income to be able to afford everything I can in the town, which will help keep the town healthy. And also for the meat markets in town and groceries in town, which a lot of them get fresh meat from certified growers. I am always urging my friends and neighbor to do the same, and I urge you also to do the same. It is possible to change and strip down the wrongly used powers of the federal government. Yes, It is possible, and it is able to be done, and it needs to be done. Carefully, though, with the governors backing each upon their own state citizens. As always, my friends, journey safely. Stretch your mind and understand the greater capacities of the living universe and an intense amount of different species and variables of them within. As always, good night.